One person, one choice, one single moment can be the catalyst for a total transformation. Witness the stories that change the world, one small spark at a time, through our cinematic lens. Hit subscribe now and be part of the change you want to see.
I was sitting at the head of a conference table on the 14th floor of a building that had my name on the lease, watching the Atlanta skyline turn gold in the late afternoon light, when my phone buzzed with a message that made my hands go still. It was from my daughter, after 9 years of silence. My name is Gloria Mercer. I am 63 years old. I built a company from a folding table and a storage unit, and for almost a decade, my only child believed I was the villain of her story. What I am about to tell you is the truth, every painful, humiliating, and ultimately freeing piece of it. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, the daughter of a seamstress and a man who drove long-haul trucks and came home smelling like diesel and pride. We did not have much, but my mother made sure I understood the value of showing up. She pressed my clothes the night before school every single morning of my childhood. Never once did I leave the house without looking like someone who mattered. That stayed with me. I married Daniel Mercer when I was 26. He was handsome in the way that trouble usually is, tall, easy smile, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and made you feel like the most important person in any room he walked into. We had our daughter Renee 2 years later. For a while, we were exactly what we looked like, a family. I worked in commercial real estate, not selling houses, negotiating leases for retail properties, office spaces, the kind of deals that take months and involve lawyers on both sides. I was good at it. By the time Renee was in middle school, I was managing a regional portfolio for a firm in downtown Atlanta and bringing home more money than Daniel, which I never once mentioned and he never once forgot. He had his own business, a landscaping and property maintenance company he had started with his brother, Curtis. It did fine. Some years it did well. But it was not growing the way he wanted, and I think something inside him began to curdle around that fact. I did not see it clearly then. I see it perfectly now. When Renee was 15, I found out that Daniel and Curtis had been using the business account to move money that did not belong to them. I did not go looking for it. A client of mine mentioned, almost in passing, that he had seen Curtis at a property that I knew was connected to a fraud investigation being handled by the county. I went home that night and I asked Daniel a simple question. I asked him what he knew about that property. He looked at me for a long moment across our kitchen table and the house I had helped pay for, and he said he did not know what I was talking about. I believed him. I should not have, but I did. 3 months later, federal investigators came to our door before sunrise on a Tuesday. They had warrants. They had documents. They had, I would learn, a signed statement from Daniel's attorney, suggesting that the financial records they were looking for had been maintained by me. I stood in my bathrobe in my own foyer and watched 2 agents carry out boxes of files from the home office, the office I used for my legitimate work, the office where I kept records of every transaction I had ever touched, and I did not understand yet what was happening. I thought it was a mistake. I thought it would be cleared up within days. It was not cleared up within days. Daniel had, over the course of more than 2 years, structured a paper trail that ran through a shell account tied to my name. An account I had never opened, never used, never seen. His brother Curtis had a cousin who worked at a small regional bank. I will let you connect those dots yourself. By the time the indictment came down, the paperwork suggested that I had been the one coordinating the movement of funds through fictitious property management contracts. My attorney told me we had a strong case. He told me the truth would come out in discovery. He was not wrong about the truth. He was wrong about the timeline. I spent 14 months in a federal correctional facility in Tallahassee. 14 months away from my home, my career, my daughter. 14 months in a place where the fluorescent lights never fully turned off, and the air always smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and something underneath it that no amount of cleaner could touch. Renee was 16 when I went in. She was almost 18 when I came out. Those are years you do not get back. You cannot explain that to a teenager. You cannot explain it to yourself. What I did not know while I was inside, what I would only learn much later, was that Daniel had not been idle during my absence. He had remarried within 8 months. Her name was Sylvia. She was 41 years old and she came with money of her own and opinions about everything, including me. She moved into my house. She slept in my bedroom. She stood at my kitchen counter and made my daughter breakfast, and I imagine she did it with a certain quiet satisfaction. And she worked on Renee. I do not say that with pure bitterness, because I have had years to understand how it happens. A grieving teenager, angry and embarrassed, living in a house with a woman who was warm and present, and who had a very clear and simple explanation for everything that had gone wrong in our family. The explanation was me. I had been careless. I had been greedy. I had been Paris the family. The conviction was right there in the public record. Sylvia did not have to invent very much. She just had to frame it, and she framed it every day, in small ways, consistently, the way water shapes stone. By the time I was released, Renee would not take my calls. I stood outside the facility on a Thursday morning in October with a plastic bag containing my personal belongings and a check for the money in my commissary account, and I called my daughter's number and listened to it ring 6 times before it went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording sounded exactly like mine did at her age. I left a message. She never returned it. I stayed with my cousin Lottie in Macon for the first 3 months. Lottie was 62 then and lived alone in a 2-bedroom house with a garden she tended like it was a person she loved. She fed me, let me sleep, and did not ask me many questions. She understood that I needed to be quiet for a little while before I could be anything else. Getting my license reinstated took 7 months. I had been convicted of a federal financial crime. The professional board does not move quickly and it does not move gently. I hired a different attorney, a woman named Patricia Okafor, who specialized in professional reinstatement cases, and who had the particular quality of never seeming surprised by anything. She filed every motion in sequence, responded to every request with precision, and 11 months after I walked out of that facility, I had my real estate broker's license back in my hand. I want you to understand what it feels like to hold a piece of paper like that after everything I had been through. It does not feel triumphant, not at first. It feels like standing at the bottom of a staircase that you know is very long and deciding that you are going to take the first step anyway. I took the first step. I started small, consulting work, helping small businesses negotiate their commercial leases, charging fees that were modest enough that clients did not feel they were taking a risk on someone with my history. I worked out of Lottie's dining room for 8 months. I drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a crack in the passenger side mirror. I ate a lot of soup. And I kept calling Renee. Not constantly. I was careful not to overwhelm her. Once a month, I left a voicemail. I did not beg. I did not explain myself at length. I simply said that I loved her and that I was here when she was ready and that not a single day had passed without me thinking about her. I sent cards on her birthday and at Christmas. I do not know if she read them. In my second year back, I connected with a former colleague named Marcus Webb, who had started a boutique commercial real estate firm focused on mixed-use development in secondary markets, smaller cities, overlooked neighborhoods, places where the numbers worked if he knew how to read them. Marcus knew my history. He hired me anyway because he also knew my work, and because he was a man who believed that what a person has done is less interesting than what they are doing now. I was doing everything now. Within 3 years, I had closed 4 major deals, 2 of which I had sourced entirely on my own. Marcus made me a partner. I moved out of Lottie's house and into a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown Atlanta with windows that faced east and flooded the living room with morning light. I bought a coffee maker that cost more than my first month's rent in my 20s, and I used it every single morning, and I never once took it for granted. I still called Renee on the first of every month. She never called back. I learned, through an old mutual friend, that she had graduated from the University of Georgia and was working in marketing in Charlotte. I learned that she was engaged. I felt both things the way you feel something through glass, real, but with a layer between you and the full temperature of it. And then, on an unremarkable Wednesday afternoon, while I was reviewing a lease amendment for a client in Nashville, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from a number I did not have saved, but I knew the area code, Charlotte. Hi, it's Renee. I wanted to let you know that I'm getting married in June. I thought you should hear it from me. That was the entire message. I sat with it for a long time. I read it several more times, looking for warmth in it, and I found, not warmth exactly, but an opening. She had not said, I want you there. She had not said, please come. But she had said, I thought you should hear it from me. And that was a hand extended, even if it was extended stiffly, from a distance, with reservation. I wrote back, congratulations, Renee. He is a lucky man. I love you. She did not respond. A week later, a formal invitation arrived at my office address. I do not know how she got it. I had moved 3 times since she last knew where I lived, which meant she had looked for me, which meant something. The invitation was addressed to Gloria Mercer. Inside was a handwritten note on a small card. It said, "I know this is complicated, but you're still my mother. R." I held that card for a long time. I should tell you that I almost did not go. Not because I did not want to. I wanted to more than I had wanted almost anything in years, but because I understood something about the situation that I needed to think through carefully. Renee had grown up under Sylvia's version of events. She had spent 9 years marinating in a narrative where I was the cautionary tale, and now she was inviting me to stand in a room full of people who had likely heard that narrative on the most visible day of her life at an event that would be photographed and remembered. I understood the risk. I had not survived everything I had survived by being naive. I called Patricia Okafor, who by now I considered something close to a friend. I told her about the invitation. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I value most about her. And then she said, "Gloria, you have nothing to be ashamed of. The question is how you want to walk into that room." I thought about that question for 3 weeks. The wedding was at a venue outside Charlotte, a renovated estate property with a long gravel drive and white flowering trees lining the entrance. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon on a Saturday in June. I arrived at 3:45. I had spent time, a reasonable but not excessive amount of time, thinking about what I would wear. I settled on a suit, deep burgundy, Italian wool, cut by a tailor in Buckhead who had made clothes for women who ran things. I wore my mother's pearl earrings. I wore my hair the way I had worn it since I was 30, natural and silver at the temples now. And I did not do a single thing to disguise the silver because I had earned every strand of it. My car was a black Mercedes S-Class. Not rented, not borrowed. Mine. I had purchased it 8 months earlier, and I drove it myself. When I pulled up the gravel drive, a young man in a white shirt came forward to valet the car. I stepped out, smoothed my jacket, and thanked him by name after reading his badge. I walked toward the entrance of the venue at a pace I had learned from watching my mother walk into rooms where she was not expected. I heard the shift before I saw it. The way a group of people in conversation will collectively notice something and go slightly quieter. I walked through the entrance into the garden, where the pre-ceremony reception was being held. A glass of something sparkling on tables, draped in white linen, and I found myself standing in a space of maybe 80 people, many of whom I had never met, some of whom I recognized from photographs, and one of whom, standing near the bar in a cream-colored linen blazer, was Daniel. He saw me at approximately the same moment I saw him. I want to be precise about what happened, because I know how these moments get retold. He did not collapse. He did not fall to the ground. What he did was go very still, the way a person goes still when they cannot immediately determine what the appropriate response is, and then he set his glass down on the nearest surface and did not pick it up again. His wife Sylvia was standing beside him. She was wearing a pale blue dress and she had her hand on his arm, and when she followed his eye line and found me, her expression moved through several things in quick succession. Surprise, calculation, and then, underneath both of those, something that looked remarkably like guilt. I have thought about that look many times since. Guilt is interesting. It means some part of the person already knows. I did not walk toward them. I did not walk away from them. I found a spot near the flowering trees at the edge of the garden, and I stood there with the kind of composure that is only available to people who've genuinely stopped needing anything from the people looking at them. And then I heard my name. Renee was standing 10 feet away in her wedding dress, which was simple and beautiful, and exactly what I would have expected her to choose. She was 26 years old, and she looked like me at 26, and she was looking at me with an expression I cannot fully describe. Something that contained, all at once, years of distance, and something older than the distance. Something that had not gone away no matter how long or how consistently it had been told to. I said, "You look like your grandmother." Her face did something complicated, and then she walked toward me and put her arms around me and she held on, and I held on, and neither of us said anything for a long moment that felt like the longest and shortest moment of the last 9 years. When she stepped back, her eyes were wet. She said, "I have so many things to say to you." I said, "I know. There's time. Today you get married." She laughed a little, the way you laugh when you are trying not to cry, and she squeezed my hands once, and then her maid of honor appeared and pulled her gently back toward the bridal suite, and I watched her go. The ceremony was beautiful. I sat in the 5th row on the bride's side. I watched my daughter walk down the aisle on the arm of her uncle, my brother Raymond, who had found me 3 years ago and re-established contact and who squeezed my shoulder when he passed my row. I watched her say her vows to a young man named Andrew, who had kind eyes and held her hands carefully, like they were something worth being careful with. I cried quietly, and I did not try to stop myself. At the reception, Daniel approached me once. He stood close enough that it was a private conversation, and he said, in a low voice, that he had not expected me to come. I said, "I know." He said, "Gloria." I said, "Not today, Daniel." "Not here." He nodded once, slowly, and walked away, and I let him. What happened next was not something I planned or anticipated. Toward the end of the reception, Renee found me at my table and sat down beside me and took out her phone and showed me something. It was a photograph of my commissary account balance from a letter she had found 2 years ago, going through old boxes at her father's house. A letter I had sent her that had never been given to her. There were others, she said. Birthday cards. Photographs. A letter I wrote the week she graduated from high school, telling her how proud I was. She had found all of them in a box in the garage, bound with a rubber band, unopened. I did not say anything about Sylvia. I did not say anything about Daniel. I simply looked at my daughter's face, and I understood that she had been doing her own excavating for longer than I had known, and that what she had found had led her here, to this invitation, to this moment. She said, "I'm sorry it took me so long." I said, "You got here." On my drive back to Atlanta that night, I crossed the state line just as the sky went completely dark, and the stars came out hard and clear, the way they do in the rural stretch between Charlotte and home. I drove with the windows down slightly and the radio off. I thought about my mother pressing my clothes the night before school. I thought about Lottie's garden in Macon. I thought about Patricia Okafor filing motions, and Marcus Webb, who believed in what a person is doing now, and the crack in the passenger mirror of a Honda Civic I no longer owned. I thought about a daughter in a wedding dress who had looked at me across a garden and remembered something that 9 years in a woman named Sylvia had not been able to fully take away. Here is what I know at 63, sitting in an office with my name on the lease and the Atlanta skyline going gold outside the window. The people who tried to bury you made one critical mistake. They assumed that how they saw you was the only way you could be seen. They forgot that you were still in there, still building, still the person who pressed your own clothes the night before and showed up looking like someone who mattered. You do not have to announce your resurrection. You just have to arrive.